The sheer audacity unfolding here is incredible. Niu Wei, ever the cunning puppet master, meticulously explains the Han currency system to leader Xin, almost lulling him with its supposed benefits and convenience. But that single, electrifying detail, the Han chieftain's portrait brazenly minted on every coin, becomes the catalyst for Xin's terrifying epiphany. It's absolutely gripping to witness his initial tech envy and wounded pride morph into raw survivalist fear as he starts connecting the dots. The currency push, the suspiciously timed invitation to Han lands, and the horrifying prospect of a full-blown takeover. The dramatic irony is just chef's kiss. Niu Wei still believes he's masterfully guiding Xin towards the Han's grand design, completely oblivious that his leader now sees a monstrous conspiracy and questions Niu Wei's own loyalty. You can almost feel the ground shifting beneath Xin's feet. He's now desperately trying to rally his truly loyal elders, but can they possibly outmaneuver such a colossal, insidious scheme already set in motion for decades? The entire dynamic just flipped on its head. Elder Jin and Elder Qi were utterly baffled. Weren't they supposed to be discussing creating some kind of currency? How had they suddenly become a target for the Han tribe? And what exactly was the Han tribe after? Seeing the elders' uncomprehending and suspicious expressions, Commander Xin proceeded to tell them everything. What Niu Wei had just said, the Han tribe's intention to introduce their currency on Bamboo Island, the true purpose behind the invitation to visit the Han tribe, along with his own analysis and suspicions regarding Niu Wei. Elder Jin and Elder Qi broke out in a cold sweat upon hearing this. Just moments before, they had been making arrangements for their visit to the Han tribe. Now it seemed if they went, they might return to find their own tribe gone. Or worse, they might not return at all. So, Commander, Elder Jin began, does this mean we're not going this time? But from the Han tribe's stance, and from what that fellow Niu Wei implied, it seems that whether we go or not, their delegation will push their currency on our Bamboo Island. What should we do then? Elder Jin picked up a silver coin, turning it over and over in his hand. Looking at the portrait depicted on it, his feelings were complex. This young man, a single decision from him could bring devastating ruin to the Xin tribe. I've thought about it, Commander Xin said. We cannot allow the Han tribe to introduce their currency here, and we cannot accept their invitation this time, because if we refuse their demand to introduce the currency, then whether it's me or you, any of us who go to the Han tribe might truly never return. However, currency is indeed a good thing. Even without the Han tribe's money and technology, we must develop our own. It doesn't matter if it's not as refined as theirs, as long as it can be widely used. It also needs to be easily distinguishable. The method of differentiation should follow the Han tribe system, divided into 3 tiers. If that's too difficult, then make it 2 tiers using our red gold, copper, and white gold, silver, to make them. This way, once we have our own currency, it will be difficult for the Han tribe to promote theirs. Furthermore, when we trade in the future, we will also require the Han tribe to use our money for purchases. If they don't have our currency, we'll revert to the old method of barter. What do you think of this idea? Commander Xin asked. That could work, Elder Jin said after some thought. Anyway, whatever the Han tribe has, we should have too. If it doesn't work out immediately, we can develop it slowly. This currency, I don't think it will be too difficult to produce. But there's the issue of its value that you just mentioned, Commander. If we introduce our own currency, will the commoners try to cause a run by melting down their household copperware? We don't have as much iron as the Han tribe, you know. That's not a major problem. Commander Xin immediately offered his solution. The Xin tribe is ours, after all. We just need to decree that copperware cannot be used for trade. Only copper minted into coins can be. This will prevent people from causing a run by melting down items. Besides, just as that fellow Niu Wei said, the commoners rely on their farming tools to make a living. They won't trade them all away for other things. The 2 elders nodded in agreement, silent, both contemplating the tasks they needed to undertake. Do you two have any other thoughts? Commander Xin asked, seeing their silence. This time, we're refusing the Han tribe's invitation and also stopping them from issuing currency on Bamboo Island. Our two tribes' relationship will likely deteriorate rapidly. It might even lead to war. Shouldn't we also make some preparations? Elder Qi thought for a moment, then suddenly said to Commander Xin, Commander, I have a suggestion. Seeing as Niu Wei has already defected to the Han tribe, we certainly can't let him remain free. However, the man spent over a year with the Han tribe. His familiarity with them is unmatched by any of us. So I suggest we capture him and interrogate him thoroughly. We might be able to extract information about the Han tribe that we don't currently possess. Details about their military, their systems, all sorts of intelligence. This is precisely the information we urgently need. Since we must prepare for a fallout with the Han tribe, it's better if we understand more about our opponent's methods. Take their methods for promoting currency, for example. That fellow definitely knows far more about it than we do. Correct, Elder Jin chimed in. Elder Qi's reasoning is sound. We do indeed need this kind of information. No one in our Xin tribe knows more about these matters than he does. I'll add one more point, Elder Jin continued. Those who accompanied Niu Wei to the Han tribe, I say we round them all up as well. They are all his confidants, and also spent a long time there. They must know a fair bit. Even if one or two refuse to talk, with that many people, some are bound to speak. Commander Xin narrowed his eyes, very tempted by this suggestion. But if Niu Wei had truly defected, wouldn't arresting him now simply accelerate the Han tribe's decision to turn hostile? At this thought, Commander Xin suddenly gave a wry smile and shook his head. What difference did it make whether the Han tribe turned hostile sooner or later? They had never harbored good intentions towards his tribe anyway. Then arrest them, Commander Xin said. His mind made up. Elder Jin and Elder Qi exchanged a glance, then nodded, indicating their approval. Do you have any other suggestions? Commander Xin pressed on. This is the Han tribe we're talking about. They certainly won't be easy to deal with. Well, let me think, Elder Jin mused. If we truly fall out with the Han tribe, and if they decide to attack us, they will certainly come by sea. Also, their delegation's encampment. We need to prepare defenses there in advance. We don't have large ships capable of challenging the Han tribe at sea, so we'll have to rely on coastal defenses. Yes, weapons, soldiers. We need to start preparing all of them, Elder Qi added. Additionally, I suggest we try to contact that Modern from the grasslands. Although that fellow is no saint either. If we can get him to cause trouble for the Han tribe, I believe they won't have as much energy to spare for us. After all, their territory is vast, but their population is limited. Even if they want to attack us, the number of soldiers they can actually deploy against us will be finite. If we can get that fellow Modin to tie down the Han tribe's soldiers on the grasslands, then we will have more time to focus on our own development. I've heard some news from the grasslands, Elder Qi continued. Ever since the Han tribe built cities there, Modin has been having a very hard time. They are now desperately short of salt. We can offer them weapons and salt, and in return, get them to attack the Han tribe's grassland cities. That fellow Modin is truly detestable, Commander Xin mused. However, if he can act as a shield for us, taking the brunt of their initial force, it wouldn't be a bad strategy. Then let's settle on this. Send someone to the Han tribe delegation's encampment and inform them they are forbidden from using their currency on Bamboo Island. Send another team to the grasslands to contact Modin. It would be best if he sends an envoy here so we can maintain regular contact. And then, you two must find a way to expedite the minting of our own currency. But before all that, Commander Xin decided, we'd better arrest Niu Wei first. While Commander Xin and his two most trusted elders plotted to capture Niu Wei himself remained oblivious. He was even still wondering when Commander Xin would accept your invitation to visit the Han tribe. The man's judgment had been clouded by his eagerness for quick success and recognition. He was desperate to prove his worth to you. Meanwhile, in the Han tribe, You had also encountered some issues. They weren't critical, but they weren't insignificant either. A message had suddenly arrived. The Han tribe was about to have more iron than it could use. Iron, so abundant it couldn't all be used. The notion was utterly absurd. It only made you realize just how weak the Han tribe truly was. After all, in your previous life during such a developed era, even with the world's leading annual steel production, no one ever claimed to have too much. The reason for this wasn't that the Han tribe's iron smelting industry was particularly advanced, but rather that its population was too small. With a total of just over 100,000 people, even if everyone wore iron armor, how much iron could they possibly consume? So having an excess of iron only proved the Han tribe's small population, not its strength. The question now was whether to continue production. If not, what would the people of Xinjiang Prefecture do? Coal mining in Dongxin Prefecture could continue. Stockpiling more coal wasn't an issue. Besides, even if Xinjiang stopped smelting steel, Kaiyuan Prefecture on the grasslands would be a major coal consumer. Once winter arrived, the grasslands became a vast expanse of white. Trees were already scarce and couldn't provide enough fuel. Herders typically collected and dried cattle dung, which contained grass fibers, to use as fuel. But things were different now. After the Han tribe established a city on the grasslands, they naturally had to consider the fuel problem. Kaiyuan Prefecture was situated by a lake, making it most convenient to transport coal by large boats. The current season was also the best time for stockpiling coal. Dongxin Prefecture, too, was located on the banks of the Liuyang River. Even if its inhabitants stopped mining coal altogether, they could turn to farming. Xinjiang Prefecture, however, was a different story. The area was all mountains and mines, the ground saturated with heavy metals. There was also a salt lake, and the surrounding landscape consisted of grassland and hilly terrain, without even a patch of forest. Fresh water was also distant. They genuinely couldn't grow crops there. If they didn't mine and smelt iron, the entire prefecture's population would have nothing to do. Therefore, iron smelting couldn't stop. Since they currently had more than they could use, they just had to find more things to make with it. Apart from essential reserves, the rest could be utilized as much as possible. You paced your study, thinking about items that required a lot of steel, but found there wasn't much you could currently produce. Laying a railway would certainly consume a lot of iron, but without a rolling mill, producing such long rails was impossible. Relying on manual hammering was pure fantasy. Steel reinforcing bars were also excellent, a boon for infrastructure, useful for building houses, paving roads, and constructing bridges, but mass-producing them also required a rolling mill. As for the single bar used as a lightning rod on the lighthouse last time, that had genuinely been hammered out by hand. Seamless steel pipes also had significant applications. Leaving aside making guns and cannons, even producing things like bicycles and tricycles would require a considerable amount, as those items were mostly welded from steel pipes. But mass-producing steel pipes also necessitated a rolling mill. This created an awkward predicament. Many things were needed, yet without a rolling mill, they couldn't be made. Wasn't this utterly preposterous? A rolling mill itself wasn't terribly complex. It was essentially just some large steel machinery. However, it required a power source to operate. Otherwise, it was just a useless lump of iron doomed to rust. In other words, the current situation was that the Han tribe needed some form of man-made power machinery to solve the problem of excess steel production. The solution seemed simple. Given the Han tribe's current resources of coal and iron, they could just build a steam engine. But that device wasn't so easy to construct. The core technologies of a steam engine were its four crucial components: the cylinder, piston, bearings, and valves. The Han tribe was currently incapable of producing almost any of these. Take the cylinder, for instance. It needed a perfect tight seal with the piston, had to be strong, and couldn't leak air. The reason the West had managed to create this back then was because their technology in this area was relatively mature. At that time, the West was at the tail end of the age of discovery. Technologies like cannon casting and boring machines had reached the pinnacle of human achievement for that era, and cannons shared remarkably similar principles with steam engine cylinders. Both required strength, durability, an airtight seal, and a tight fit between the cylinder, cannon barrel, and the piston, cannonball. Consequently, some individuals had used cannon-making methods to create the earliest Newcomen steam engine. Did this mean that for the Han tribe to make a steam-on engine, they too had to develop cannons first? This seemed like a promising idea. Regardless of whether a steam engine could be successfully built, cannons alone would consume a large amount of iron. After all, a cannon required not only the barrel but also many iron cannonballs. A single cannon weighed over 1,000 jin, a traditional unit of weight, roughly half a kilogram. If they made several of these, wouldn't the iron be used up? Having made up your mind, you immediately began designing cannons. These weapons were actually quite versatile. They could be used in field battles, mounted on city walls for defense, or placed on ships as naval armaments. Accuracy aside, as long as they made a loud bang, in this era, that alone could scare enemies away. Of course, if they could actually fire a projectile, that would be even better. Firing a cannon was an art. Casting one was a technology. To cast high-quality, effective cannons required even more advanced technology. The first step was selecting the material. Taking muzzle-loading smoothbore cannons as an example, steel cannons were superior, followed by bronze, with iron cannons ranking a distant third. Steel cannons were primarily strong, relatively lightweight, and offered the best durability. Bronze cannons were also quite good. The Napoleonic cannons were perhaps the most famous. The greatest advantage of bronze cannons was their high temperature resistance, making them very durable. They also had good ductility and were less prone to bursting. However, their drawbacks were also obvious. Bronze was much heavier than steel of the same volume, and it was very expensive. As for the remaining option iron, it wasn't worth considering. Not only was it prone to bursting, but it was also extremely heavy. If one had the capability to produce steel, iron was simply out of the question. Besides, the primary purpose of casting cannons this time wasn't because the Han tribe lacked military firepower, but because there was too much iron with no use for it. Therefore, consuming steel should be the main objective. Given this, bronze was even less suitable. Wouldn't it be a much better use for it to make money? Once the material was chosen, the next consideration was its application. The Han tribe's cannons would primarily be for defensive purposes. It was still a bit early for field artillery, nor were there many field battles for the Han tribe to fight. So you decided to design a dual-purpose cannon, suitable for both naval and fortress use. This would also avoid the logistical difficulties of supplying too many different models. To put it plainly, it meant standardizing the caliber. Naval cannons on ships wouldn't actually be of much use at present, as the Han tribe didn't even have an enemy with large ships. Therefore, if naval cannons were used, it would likely only be for bombarding land targets. Thus, a cannon with long range and great power became the Han tribe's preferred choice. Following the principle that a longer barrel equates to a longer range, you directly set the cannon's length to 2 meters, keeping things simple. The caliber would be based on a standard 12-pounder. Not too big, not too small, just right. Just as you were contemplating how to increase steel consumption, time had marched on to the 10th month of the first year of the Han tribe's new era. This was the last month of autumn. The cold winter was fast approaching, yet Niu Wei was still in the north, showing no intention of returning. In an unnamed river valley, over 1,000 kilometers northeast of the Han tribe, a large banner emblazoned with the character Han, fluttered in the wind. This was a temporary encampment established by Niu Wei. However, the camp was currently a hive of activity. On a flat expanse within the river valley, cleared and now home to numerous low-slung adobe houses, a dense but orderly settlement had sprung up, resembling a residential district in a Han tribe city. Though these houses lacked courtyards and appeared exceedingly crude, mostly with thatched roofs, They were arranged with a semblance of order. There were many houses, numbering around 1,000, and more were continuously being built. Within this large, suspected settlement, countless people were anxiously gathering supplies for the winter. Yu Yi's crew members were also here. Some were leading women and older children in harvesting corn planted on the hillsides, grown from the reserve grain Yu Yi had brought on his sailboat. The plucked ears of corn were placed in wicker baskets and then carried back to the camp on shoulder poles. The remaining corn stalks were harvested and brought back to the camp for storage, to be used as fuel or livestock fodder during the winter. A dedicated corral in the camp housed some captured wild Argali sheep, unidentified, deer, and even a dozen or so wild asses with bluish-gray fur, primarily used for pulling carts. The carts had been built by the artisans accompanying the ship. The rammed earth technique for building the adobe houses was also introduced by Yu Yi. Farming, animal husbandry, everything was brought from the Han tribe. This place bore the imprint of the Han tribe everywhere, yet the people living here were referred to by Yu Yi as the Remnant Clans. These were all tribes that had been attacked by cannibals. Some of their members had been captured, while others had managed to escape. All were remnants of their original tribes, hence the name Remnant Clans. Some had even been rescued by Yu Yi and his men from small cannibal patrols, or after being discovered by Yu Yi, had been collectively settled here. Over the better part of a year, through a combination of persuasion and rescue, their numbers had swelled to 4,000 or 5,000, and they were still growing. In the afternoon, the men returned. They either carried captured game on their shoulders or bore bundles of firewood slung over branches. Not a single one returned empty-handed. These men carried longbows on their backs, held spears in their hands, had stone axes tucked into their belts, and each was equipped with 4 or 5 arrows. Everyone was armed. Every day they went out to hunt and gather firewood, incidentally also performing patrol duties. However, compared to their previous lives, their current existence was much improved. With the Han tribe's help, they had learned many new skills, archery being just one of them. Most importantly, they had learned to set traps which saved them a great deal of hunting time. Sometimes, if a cannibal hunting party was spotted, Yu Yi would also gather men to go to the rescue, armed with bows and arrows, and with the advantage of surprise and superior numbers. They could usually prevail against small hunting parties. Otherwise, they wouldn't have managed to gather so many refugees in just half a year. After the men returned with their prey, designated individuals were responsible for butchering, using the iron knives brought by Yu Yi and his crew. Iron. Tools were extremely scarce here. Most were personal equipment brought by the crew members themselves. There were only 2 iron pots, which Yu Yi and his men had always used. Fortunately, the multi-talented crew members had taught these people how to fire pottery, enabling several thousand individuals to have pots, bowls, and basins. Salt was also available here. Yu Yi had discovered a salt pan in another location, essentially a saline alkaline patch of land with some water. They would bring back salty earth and then filter and evaporate it themselves. The yield wasn't large, but it was enough to sustain the camp's daily consumption. Even the elderly and children weren't idle. They cultivated or gathered wild hemp, vines, and similar materials, then retted the hemp to extract fibers for twisting into ropes, bowstrings, or for weaving nets. The nets could be used to make traps for catching game, or to capture live animals. The wild sheep and asses in the camp had been acquired this way. Vines and similar materials were used for weaving baskets or chicken coops. There were no looms. Here, the carpenter who had come with the ship didn't know how to make them. Consequently, there were no hemp sacks. Items were generally transported in baskets. The chickens were also captured wildfowl, primarily for collecting feathers to make arrows. Resources here were not as abundant as in the Han tribe, so making arrows was quite troublesome, and the arrowheads were mostly fashioned from animal bones. The camp bustled with activity until nightfall. Numerous bonfires were lit, and smoke curled up from every household. The camp's only 2-masted sailboat also returned, and the crowd erupted in cheers, rushing to meet it with baskets. Without asking, it was clear it carried a full load of fish. This ship was still under Yu Yi's personal command. It went out fishing every day, incidentally also searching for other similar remnant clans. Each trip lasted several days. Upon return, it either brought back some strangers or a full load of fish. Of course, reconnoitering the cannibals' main encampment was also one of their tasks. After all, Yu Yi wouldn't have been able to gather so many remnant clans without a reason. He had managed to successfully persuade so many people by promising to help rescue their kinsfolk and incidentally protect these remnants. In any case, this was one of the Han tribe's objectives, so agreeing to it wasn't a big deal, as long as he could eventually bring these people back to the Han tribe. This time was no exception. Yu Ye guided the crew to dock at the simple wharf. A dozen or so clan chiefs of the remnant clans immediately led people forward to greet them. They began unloading the fish and replacing the fishing nets. Several clan chiefs noticed that some of their kinsmen who had gone out with the ship had not returned, and they immediately became anxious and started asking questions. "Envoy Yu, what about those few youngsters from our clan who went out with you? Why haven't they returned? Envoy Yu, did you encounter those man-eating savages again?" Yu Yi, looking somewhat weary, raised a torch and came ashore. He addressed the clan chiefs gathered around him. "No, rest assured. Clan chiefs, they are all fine. We just discovered another small remnant tribe of over 200 people further out. The sailboat couldn't bring them all back in one trip, so I left some men and food there to watch over them. As soon as the fish on board are unloaded, we'll set out again immediately. It will take 3 or 4 trips to bring everyone back. Clan chiefs don't slack off either. Before the snow starts falling, it's best to build more houses. Otherwise, people will freeze to death in winter." "Oh, so that's how it is. That's good. As long as they're all right. Envoy Yu, you've worked hard. How many more houses do we need to prepare?" "There are still dozens of empty ones. That should be enough, right? The number of people has increased again, so we'll need to store more food. If necessary, I'll lead a party tomorrow to bring back that herd of wild oxen. The hunting party has been tracking them for several days. We'll take more men then." The group of clan chiefs started chattering boisterously again. "Prepare more houses." Yu Yi immediately began assigning tasks. "Our numbers will only continue to grow in the future. It's better to be over-prepared. As for hunting, you can make the arrangements. Just tell the hunting party to be careful and avoid any major losses. It's already very difficult for everyone to have survived this far." This was how the camp was currently managed. Although Yu Ye of the Han tribe was the initiator of the settlement, and it was nominally the Han tribe's frontline counter-offensive base, Yu Ye couldn't possibly manage all the daily affairs. So he had delegated the day-to-day management of the camp to the chiefs of these remnant clans. They were willing to do these tasks, and Yu Yi was happy to have less on his plate, continuing to sail around in his boat every day. Countless reeds grew around the salt marsh in the high, cold mountains. Perhaps only such humble yet resilient plants could thrive in this harsh, saline, alkaline land. Hidden among the reeds was a collection of salt pools, large and small, resembling little puddles. The surrounding mudflats, though treacherous, were covered in a white crust of salt. Currently, about 300 cannibal totem warriors were overseeing their newly captured slaves as they collected the naturally formed salt frost. On the other side of the reed bed, dozens of warriors clad in animal skins were stealthily watching them. A much larger force remained hidden on the periphery. This was a rescue and annihilation operation personally planned by Yu Yi and the Remnant Clan chief in charge of hunting. 800 men against 300. It was shaping up to be a battle of considerable scale. The Remnant Clan chief, in charge of hunting, was clearly skilled at encirclement hunts. But when it came to actual combat between their own kind, Yu Yi undoubtedly had more experience. After all, he was considered a relatively senior figure in the Han tribe, having joined shortly after the Shu tribe and the Heishu tribe. He had even witnessed firsthand several battles between the Han tribe and invading cannibals. All right, so he hadn't participated, but at least he had observed, Especially regarding the tactical deployment of archers, Yu Yi clearly had more authority. Thus, the battle plan was decided based on Yu Yi's tactics. The 800-strong hunting party was divided into two parts. 200 men without bows were all equipped with spears, stone axes, and shields, close combat weapons. Of course, their objective wasn't to charge directly into hand-to-hand combat with the enemy, but to act as bait, drawing the enemy's attention and luring the vast majority of them away to a designated attack position. Then the longbow contingent would provide ranged fire support, using their superior firepower to eliminate the enemy in one wave, avoiding close quarters fighting as much as possible to prevent unnecessary losses on their own side. There was another reason for this decision. The current positioning of the cannibal totem warriors was problematic. They were intermingled with the captives. If a saturation arrow attack were launched at this moment, it was likely that many of the captives, controlled by the enemy, would die in the arrow storm before many enemies were killed. This would defeat their primary objective of rescuing the captives. Therefore, they first had to lure the enemy away, temporarily separating them from the captives, and then concentrate their superior forces for annihilation. Luring the tiger out of the mountain, or drawing the snake out of its hole. This was clearly a skilled operation. Sending too few men, say 50 or 60, might not even register with the enemy. They might simply dispatch 100 or so of their own to deal with them. Revealing their full strength at once would only frighten the enemy, causing them to either flee directly or dig in for a desperate defense, which would be counterproductive to Yu Yi's tactical goals. 200 men was just right. A visible force of 200 would put pressure on the enemy's 300. If the enemy wanted to avoid significant losses, they would have to commit at least an equal number of their own forces to counter them. Achieving this effect was already satisfactory for Yu Ye. If they could eliminate 200 of the enemy's main force in a single engagement, then the remaining 100, facing their own 800 and the likely rebelling captives, would be easily crushed by over 1,000 men. The Remnant Clan chief in charge of hunting was also very optimistic about Yu Yi's plan. After hearing it explained just once, he immediately agreed and requested to lead the 200-man decoy team himself. He was fond of bows and arrows as weapons, but he truly didn't understand how to employ archers in combat. The 200 men had already crept silently behind the cannibal totem warriors. Their grass sandals made no sound on the soft, muddy flats. This type of terrain slowed down any animal, and humans were no exception, but it was ideal for ambushes. The surrounding reeds were tall, providing effective concealment. One could probably hide 20 or 30,000 warriors in this reed bed perfectly, let alone their mere few hundred. They chose to launch a surprise attack first, leveraging their initiative, aiming to reduce the enemy's numbers by at least 50 in the initial assault, which would make the subsequent engagement easier. Swish, 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 swish. The sound of whistling stones and whirring javelins suddenly erupted from the reed bed behind the cannibal totem warriors, followed immediately by a chorus of screams. The unsuspecting white devils, a derogatory term for the cannibals, were ambushed from behind. Some were struck by stones, others impaled by javelins. The unlucky ones were even hit directly in the head by flying stones. In such a dense crowd, there were always a couple of lucky ones who were either knocked unconscious on the spot or had their skulls crushed, dying instantly. However, the combat discipline of the cannibal white devils was no bluff. They had all been tempered through constant fighting. The moment they were ambushed, they identified the enemy's position behind them. Then, without panicking, these men picked up their weapons and began to form ranks, as if this sort of thing wasn't new to them. Some did not join the immediate fray, but vigilantly watched the captives nearby, occasionally barking incomprehensible commands at them to stay put. The Han tribe faction, having succeeded in their initial surprise attack, didn't stay hidden. Their goal was to lure the tiger from the mountain, to draw the snake from its hole. If they didn't show themselves, how could they draw the enemy out? Thus, the 200 men who had just launched the ambush charged out, shouting loudly. To make it easier for the enemy to count their numbers, they even deliberately divided into several small squads, 4 groups of 50, allowing the enemy to instantly assess their strength. Then, instead of charging headlong, they continued to attack with slingstones, javelins, and stone axes, loosing another volley of thrown weapons into the enemy ranks. The cannibal White Devils also began a defensive counterattack, first weathering a wave of projectiles with their rattan shields. Seeing that the suddenly appearing enemy numbered only these 200, and that there was no further movement in the reed bed behind them, their leader instantly made a decision. They would pursue, and they would commit most of their men to the pursuit. This was just a group of rookies who had never fought before. Look at how timid they were, just standing at a distance throwing stones. Even if such an attack hit someone, how much damage could it do? The enemy was clearly a disorganized rabble. A single charge with superior numbers from their side would undoubtedly turn this group into their captives as well. And so, a dramatic scene unfolded. The cannibals left 70 or 80 men to guard the captives, while the remaining nearly 200, including those lightly wounded in the ambush, all rushed in pursuit. The captives were all tied together in a line. Lacking suitable weapons and faced with the White Devil's spears and ferocious appearance, they dared not resist for the time being. Moreover, they could see that the group attacking the White Devils wasn't very large and might soon be defeated, so their hopes of rescue were slim. On the other side, the chase quickly began. In such muddy terrain, neither side could run fast, so they exchanged fire while pursuing. The Han tribe faction in front occasionally hurled a volley of stones, but they were almost out of the stones they carried. Stone axes were difficult to make and couldn't be thrown carelessly. At the rear of their formation, those bringing up the rear carried shields, crude, makeshift ones. Some were woven from rattan, others were simply a row of uneven wooden sticks tied together. Although the carpenter in the camp was capable of making wooden planks, the hand-sawn planks were barely enough for other purposes, let alone making shields. These rudimentary weapons were also made by the warriors themselves in their spare time, following methods provided by Niu Wei. The thudding of stones against wooden shields didn't injure many. The cannibals also had javelins, but in this kind of running fight, javelins were the most useless weapon. Their effective range was short to begin with, and the Han tribe faction in front had shield protection. It would be a miracle if they managed to kill anyone. However, during the pursuit, some were still injured, hit by stones or stone axes. This could only be attributed to bad luck. Fortunately, there weren't many such casualties and none were wounded in the legs, so they could still run and hadn't fallen behind yet. But the cannibal White Devils following in pursuit began to feel that something was amiss. What was the deal with this group? Attack once and then just keep running? Were they trying to lure them away so another group could rescue the captives? That seemed possible. The leader in charge was about to order a halt to the pursuit when, just as they reached a small muddy pond, the 200 Han tribe men in front suddenly stopped. They were no longer running. They formed ranks, turned around and faced them, weapons raised as if intending to fight to the death in this muddy spot. However, the leading chieftain clearly thought things weren't that simple. He quickly scanned the dense reed beds on 3 sides of the mudflat, wary of more enemies suddenly charging out. Yet there was nothing. The 200 men before them seemed to be genuine novices, completely ignorant of tactics like ambushes, lures, or feints. Such a perfect spot for an ambush, and they hadn't stationed anyone around it? Were they fools? Since you want to fight to the death here, then come on. With the combat experience of the cannibal totem warriors and their fearless, death-defying fighting style, dealing with this group of rookies would absolutely be a one-charge victory. The minor chieftain of the cannibals raised his arm high, and just as he was about to swing it down and give the order to charge, the leader of the Han tribe faction, the clan chief, spoke first. Envoy. You sure? They're here. Fire the arrows quickly. The cannibal chieftain was momentarily stunned upon hearing this, but due to the language barrier, he didn't know what the person opposite him had just shouted. He merely looked at them with some curiosity, Why, after their leader had shouted, did the 200 men behind him remain standing? Still? No, wait, why weren't they moving? Could it be that what the man had just shouted wasn't a command? Impossible. There must be something wrong. Could he be shouting to someone else? The cannibal minor chieftain warily scanned the reed beds on the three sides again, but there was still no movement. However, just as his vigilance relaxed slightly, he suddenly sensed something flying overhead in droves. It sounded like insects or perhaps a flock of birds, though birds probably didn't fly that fast. He looked up at the sky around him. The next moment, 600 feathered arrows suddenly appeared in his field of vision, tracing high parabolic arcs from all directions and descending upon them from above. Knowing the range advantage of longbows, and to avoid alerting the enemy, by getting too close, Yu Yi had ordered his men to lie in ambush at a greater distance around the area. The entire force was to use plunging fire for an overhead attack. Upon hearing the signal from the decoy group's clan chief, the longbow contingent immediately launched a coordinated volley. Yu Ye, now leading the 600 archers, had appeared around the battlefield. He didn't even need to give any orders. The other group of 200 warriors, tasked with luring the enemy, charged forward with triumphant yells, finishing off any cannibals who weren't quite dead. The sickening thud of spears piercing flesh echoed repeatedly. Those cannibal totem warriors still drawing breath were quickly dispatched. Everyone immediately began to clear the battlefield. The archers retrieved their arrows, replenishing their ammunition. This was the advantage of feathered arrows. They could be reused, a benefit that gunpowder bullets simply couldn't match. After a short rest, the Han tribe hunting party members readied themselves and stealthily made their way back. At the cannibals' temporary camp, only a few dozen totem warriors remained, guarding several hundred captives. With their own force of about 800, victory was practically a certainty. The warriors' hearts pounded with excitement. In the previous battle, their side hadn't suffered a single fatality. Only a few warriors acting as decoys had sustained minor injuries during the pursuit, yet they had slain around 200 of the enemy. This was undoubtedly a tremendous achievement, at least in their eyes. It was a monumental victory. The cannibal totem warriors left waiting at the camp began to panic. Their comrades had been gone for so long without returning. A short while ago, they could still hear sounds of fighting, running, and the screams of many people, but now there was nothing but a deathly silence, broken only by the rustling of the reeds in the bleak autumn wind. Could the enemy have deliberately lured them away? Was their real target these remaining warriors, or was it to rescue the captives? The remaining totem warriors began to let their imaginations run wild. The captives, tied together in a line, also sensed that something was amiss. They started whispering amongst themselves, growing restless, seemingly ready to revolt at any moment. Seeing this, the cannibal totem warriors grew even more flustered and began to confer amongst themselves, looking as if they might abandon the captives and flee at any moment. They became increasingly jumpy. Any rustle of wind through the reeds could send them into a nervous frenzy. Just then, the rustling sound from the surrounding reed beds grew louder, echoing from all directions, as if thousands of people were encircling them. At this point, no one doubted anything anymore. They were absolutely certain that their 200 comrades had been deliberately lured away, and that a larger enemy force was hidden all around them. They began to slowly draw closer together, holding up their few rattan shields and warily scanning the surrounding reeds. However, they could never have imagined that this very action played right into Yu Yi's tactical needs. "Loose!" A loud shout suddenly came from the reed bed in front, startling the remaining few dozen cannibal totem warriors. Before they could react, the next second, the whoosh of feathered arrows filled the air around them. A dense volley of arrows, like vipers striking, flew from the reeds, speeding towards their target in front. A series of blood-curdling screams erupted from the clustered enemy ranks as many fell, struck down in the first hail of arrows. Then came another volley, followed by yet another. Each wave consisted of a neat 600 arrows fired simultaneously. Arrows rained down from all directions, making defense impossible. They came from virtually every angle. The captives, tied together, squatted to one side, watching in stunned disbelief. They had never witnessed this kind of warfare before. They hadn't even seen a shadow of their opponents. Yet the enemy here was falling in droves. The White Devils, who had previously beaten and berated them, killing them at will, were now being effortlessly wiped out. After 4 volleys of arrows, almost no one was left standing. At that moment, another sound came from the reed bed, then more voices, the shouts of dozens, hundreds, then 1,000 people echoing from all directions. Charge. With me, kill them. With a great rustling sound, the reeds around them swayed violently. The next moment, about 800 men burst out from the reeds. Except for the warriors armed with longbows who maintained a perimeter watch, all the other warriors charged forward in a single wave. The captives squatting nearby dared not even move. This group, who dared to casually slaughter even the White Devils, looked even fiercer. They killed without batting an eye. The captives feared they had just escaped the wolf's den only to enter the tiger's lair. The sounds of finishing blows, sickening thuds echoed nearby. Blood spurted continuously. It was brutal and bloody, a one-sided massacre. It seemed that as long as the giant apes didn't appear, the Han tribe would forever be invincible. In this era, bows and arrows were indeed truly formidable weapons of war, especially when the number of archers reached a certain scale and the enemy lacked proper armor. Anyone facing such a formation was essentially doomed to be slaughtered. The captives were terrified. They didn't know if this larger group of strangers were friend or foe, whether they had come to rescue them or to seize them as captives themselves. However, the next moment, while others were still clearing the battlefield, Yu Yi had already approached with a contingent of men and personally began to untie their bonds. A man appearing to be in his 20s or 30s cautiously approached. Judging by Yu Yi's attire and demeanor, he deduced that Yu Yi was the leader of this group. He gestured with his hands as he spoke. "Are you here to save us? What do you want to do with us?" Yu Yi couldn't understand a word he was saying. Instead, he directly handed the man the dried meat and rations he carried, then sat down cross-legged on the trampled reeds, took out his water skin, and drank deeply. To be given such good food meant the other party was actively showing goodwill. They certainly couldn't be bad people. The man's tense heart relaxed slightly. As soon as he relaxed, his stomach began to rumble. He scratched his disheveled hair in embarrassment and began to wolf down the food Yu Yi had given him. During their captivity by the cannibal White Devils, the White Devils, to reduce resistance, would never feed them properly, let alone prepare food specifically for them. They would simply observe who was in poor health, walking slowly or disobedient, and kill them directly to feed the others. This served 2 purposes. On one hand, to reduce their burden by eliminating the old, weak, sick, and disabled. On the other, to assimilate these captured prisoners, forcing them to adopt a cannibalistic lifestyle and integrate them into their own tribe sooner. While terrified, the captives, in their desire to survive, had no choice but to steal themselves and eat their own companions. They dared not slack off during marches, because the consequence of slacking was becoming the next meal. This brutal method of elimination was driving them to the brink of mental collapse. Yet they dared not refuse to eat, because without food, they would have no strength, and without strength, they would fall behind, only to be killed and turned into food. This was why so many of them, despite their numbers, could be docilely guarded by 300 men without daring to resist. Firstly, they were underfed and lacked the strength to fight back. Secondly, they were simply terrified by their captors. It had been a long time since he had eaten normal food. The man, eating the corn cakes and salted dried meat in his hand, nearly choked. Yu Yi quickly passed him the water skin and advised him to eat more slowly. At this moment, the Remnant Clan chief, who had just finished clearing the battlefield nearby, also walked over and asked Yu Yi, "Envoy Yu Shi, what do we do now? How should we handle these people?" Yu Yi looked back at the several hundred captives who had just been rescued, then turned and instructed, "You go take the warriors back to the previous site to clear the battlefield. Strip the animal skins from those white devils as well. We've suddenly gained so many people, and our need for animal skins is immense. Those skins can be patched up and made into clothes. Don't waste them, or this winter will be hard to endure. Yes, I'll take men to do it right away. After this battle, the Remnant Clan chief was thoroughly convinced of Yu Yi's abilities. With just a simple plan, Yu Yi had led them to such a great victory with almost no losses on their side. Apart from losing some arrows, out of the entire 800, and only a few had sustained minor injuries. This was something they wouldn't have dared to dream of in their previous battles against the cannibals. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been scattered by the cannibals and become displaced remnant clans. Come with us. Yu Ye immediately turned to persuade the group of captives to join his camp, having arranged for the battlefield cleanup and resource collection. We have many people. It's safe. We have clothes and food to help you get through this winter. We'll fight side by side, and you'll never have to fear them again. Once they understood Yu Yi's meaning, the captives agreed with little hesitation. As Yu Yi had said, apart from their lives, they now had nothing else. They lacked sufficient food and safe shelter to survive the long, cold winter. If they tried to migrate or escape on their own at this point, most of them would likely perish before they got very far. So Yu Yi immediately instructed his warriors to take the captives back to their own camp. They set up pottery urns, built fires, and cooked some beef and corn porridge for them to regain their strength. Then, when the other half of the men who had gone to strip the animal skins returned, they began to discuss plans for the subsequent withdrawal. This hunting expedition had yielded over 100 wild oxen. It was impossible to carry them back, doing on foot, so they had to be transported by boat. Even so, the meat from 100 oxen couldn't be carried away in a single trip. With all this beef loaded, there would be no spare room on the boat for people. Therefore, the entire group remained where they were. The 800-plus warriors of the hunting party would lead the nearly 600 newly rescued refugees on foot back to the main encampment in the river valley. By then, the new houses would likely be almost finished. This was the advantage of adobe houses: simple construction, sturdy and durable structure, and with a large workforce, they could be built incredibly quickly. As soon as the houses were reasonably dry, people could move in. If they weren't drying fast enough, they could even build heated kang, brick beds inside to artificially dispel the moisture and make the houses usable sooner. The butchered beef, hides, horns, and other items, along with the animal skins seized from the cannibals, were all loaded onto the sailboat in batches and quickly transported away. As for the newly joined refugees, not wanting to be seen as freeloaders, they naturally helped out a great deal with the work. The women and children stayed in the camp to help boil salt, while the men went to the riverside to help transport supplies. When they saw the large sailboat flying the Han tribe banner, they were immediately awestruck, muttering amongst themselves. No wonder this group was so formidable in battle. They could even build such amazing and powerful transport vessels. Thus, these refugees became even more determined to follow Yu Ye. As long as they stuck closely with this tribe, even if they truly couldn't defeat the cannibals, this tribe had the ability to help them escape quickly.